Hello and welcome back to Crypto Clarified. My name is Vinh, Tran, Associate Director of Business Development at WisdomTree Digital Assets.
And I'm Dovile Silenskyte. I'm Director responsible for digital asset research at WisdomTree Europe.
And today we're joined by Nick and Ben from the Solana Foundation. We're going to be talking about all things Solana, ecosystem. We're going to talk about tokenization use cases, and then what's next in terms of real institutional and retail adoption. Hello, Nick and Ben. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having us.
Great to be here.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. Internet capital markets. I live in New York City, so I'm seeing this everywhere I go. What is it and what does it really mean in practice?
Yeah, so internet capital markets is the idea that you can have all assets and all investors participating in the same liquidity venue. And I think we really saw this as a great example last week. I think it was last Thursday at the New York Stock Exchange. BitGo went public on the New York Stock Exchange. At that same time, a tokenized version of BitGo was available to all Solana holders in the world. So you had 80 million people, monthly active users on Solana, all able to access tokenized version of the BitGo equity that IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange. 24/7. Globally accessible and tradable against any other asset. So you can, trade your tokenized gold for your tokenized BitGo equity. And I think that's the vision of internet capital markets and, a single example.
I love it. And obviously in our space, that matters a lot. And I would say to then transition from that, right? When you talk about the Solana Foundation and Solana, the mission of the organization, how does internet capital markets translate to the broader scope, or if it even does?
Absolutely. The thing that I say is like, we've got very clear marching orders. All assets, all investors, same liquidity venue. All assets means all assets. So we want every single asset on Earth tokenized. And then all investors means all 8 billion people on planet Earth. We've got about 1% global penetration. If you think about it that way today, 99% to go. So Ben and I, wake up every day and we try to grow both sides of that equation. And we think it's a pretty virtuous flywheel because the investors want the quality assets, the issuers of the assets want the investors. And if you're bringing more and more of both of those on, they ultimately feed each other.
On that as well, Nick, I'm just saying, I think building on that, I think it's the aspiration as well. Yes, we see that 5.5 billion people, are unbanked or underbanked today, or still require access to finance. I think the aspiration, not just the aspiration, the mission statement for Solana is to build an economy. I think that's what differentiates us from nearly every chain, is that what you see being built is, obviously Nick and I are obsessive about finance, and we see that's the one of the most exciting things happening with Solana today. But we have builders building every type of application on Solana, and that interconnectivity, that builder network, is phenomenal because you start to see this cross-pollination between people building dApps across all different market segments. And I think that's going to be the real power of Solana as we go forward.
100%.
And also,
building on what Ben said really quick, we were both at a conference in Switzerland a couple of weeks ago, and we learned that in Pakistan, there's 300,000 people with a brokerage account, but 40 million with crypto wallet. And so that's the TAM that we look at is, all of those that can access the blockchain versus those that can access traditional financial rails.
and this is the serious angle of finance, people needing blockchain or people needing some rails to move money. But also what I see Solana playing a big role is, for example, gaming. So you are very much close to retail. And what else are you trying to do to be closer to retail, to be used by retail on an ongoing basis, on day-to-day basis?
Well, I mean, this may surprise some of your listeners as this is, coming from WisdomTree, a very, stalwart professional asset manager. But, we love meme coins at Solana, right? And where this is something that I don't think is mutually exclusive to the broader vision that we have of bringing all assets and all investors together. There's about 20,000 new assets being created on Solana every single day. Some of those are real world assets like tokenized WisdomTree funds. Other of those are new meme coins being created. And, we don't at the Solana Foundation serve as an arbiter of which one has, is better or the other. We let the market decide. And, one of the things we've seen over time is that there's a great deal of demand, for many of these native digital assets that are, tokenized by a pump.fun or other, launch pad. And so, we really see, bringing together folks of all shapes and sizes trading all assets of all different types.
And I think meme coins are a great way to illustrate the capabilities on Solana, because there's so much activity that's happening with meme coins. It's incredible. And for me, they are a great entertainment tool. I don't believe in putting money in meme coins, but I believe in following the cultural trends that are evolving via meme coins. It's always fascinating.
We can
Yeah,
start
it's
a Crypto Clarified meme coin, perhaps.
Yeah, that's it. That's what we need. That's what we need. I think as well, also meme coins, it's always an application. Like if you look at blockchains that were built just for finance, a number of those haven't succeeded, right? Because there wasn't the demand. So I think it's really important to acknowledge with Solana was like, it's the right product for the right market need at the right time. And we've continued that continuously. So, sometimes people are, Nick and I do get interesting comments at the time about meme coins, but we have to turn around and say, look, it shows network speed, it shows performance, it shows it was always up. And also like, there's an honesty there. Like if you're a small team building, what do you choose? You choose the easiest network to come onto with the lowest fees, with the biggest market. And that's what Solana was and still is.
Well, and I'd also add that meme coins have led to innovation in the asset class kind of more broadly. So, meme coin launchpads like Pump.fun obviously showed that there was like a great deal of demand for, investors to come and buy these assets and speculate in them. What we've now seen is companies like MetaDAO, which also is a digital asset launchpad, but these are kind of more equity-like in the sense that the team's often locked up, that there's some kind of tie with the token and, kind of commercial business outcomes. And we've seen these tokens just be able to do incredible with respect to capital formation. Recently, there was a company called Ranger, which sought to raise $6 million, and they got $86 million in subscriptions for the $6 million allocation. So the investors were cut back, substantially from what they really wanted to invest. I think that really is the vision of internet capital markets is bring, supply and demand together, and ultimately will create all sorts of new, modalities of investment and capital formation.
I think you both allude to this and how you guys are describing internet capital markets, but to me, it sounds a lot like an access point, right? And Solana, what you guys are trying to do is reduce that access point for a subset of investors, whether it is institutional or retail. To kind of double click on what we're actually accessing, you mentioned meme coins, you mentioned tokenization. What kinds of assets, real world assets, let's say, are getting the most amount of traction within the ecosystem?
So I'm really excited to share that Solana recently broke $1 billion in RWA for the first time. Where now I think it's something like 1.2 billion in RWA. That's grown 600% year over year. We were at around less than 200 million this time last year. And if you look at kind of where the demand has been for the product, so we've seen something like a BlackRock Bill Treasuries fund do particularly well. I think they're at like 200 or so million. Ondo has a permissionless version of that product called USDY that also has around 200 million. Figure, which is a public company in the United States known for tokenizing HELOCs, home equity lines of credit, last month brought that product onto Solana. They call it on Solana, it's called a Prime token, PRIME, and that's grown to $250 million in about 6 weeks. That's 9% unlevered yield on that HELOC token. And then there's like a long tail of assets. You've got private credit assets, you've got hedge funds, you've got commodities, you've got real estate. Then what am I missing?
No. I think the answer to that is actually there's everything is available like on Solana. I think the interesting inflection point I think where Nick find ourselves now is that there are enough proofs in the market that any product can exist. So I think there's that kind of, on the issuer side, I think we're seeing, as Nick alluded to, like some fantastic use cases that show that you can build these products, you can scale these products, and there's market intent. I think often where we're now looking and where we see the kind of true strength for Solana coming through is on the allocation distribution side. Because we have native distribution on chain, in our conversations with institutions, what drives intent? distribution does. Like, do you actually have retail, high net worth, sovereign, corporate treasurers that we can move these products to? So I think we're really seeing that inflection point where I think at a point in time, and quite really so, there was an obsession about issuance because we had to get this stuff to market, we had to ship, and we had to prove. I think it really, and super grateful, as Nick alluded to all the teams that have done, and yourselves that have done some of that really early work and that heavy lifting to get us to where we are today. I think this is where kind of the superpower of Solana comes in now, because we're an economy. There is an economy on Solana. We have sovereigns, we have pensions, pension trusts, we have corporate treasurers, we have high net worths, we have all these individuals exist, across, Phantom and Solflare alone are, 25 million wallets. So I think a really interesting inflection point, I think where we're going to find now is two kind of distinct use cases. They'll be building tokenized products to go out, if I can say, TradFi. So your traditional clients and, high quality liquid assets. We love a money market fund, collateral mobility, intraday liquidity, all these really wonderful things. And there'll be more of a Web3 persona, which will be looking for certain aspects, ability to move it into DeFi. But I think both of those are rapidly accelerating today.
Yeah, and that's something that we've obviously, Nick, you and I have talked extensively about, particularly around Wisdom Tree. Like we take the situation coming from an asset manager or asset issuer perspective, right? Where we've issued assets on chain, and thinking of Solana and thinking of all the different things that you've mentioned, from obviously internet capital markets, but then this access plan and this economy that you're mentioning, I think is obviously like extremely powerful for any distribution. And you mentioned a couple use cases. So for us, I like to say that we have a very dual mandate when it comes to distribution. One is obviously, how do we grow and get our tokens, our assets, RWA assets, into as many wallets as possible? The second part of that is really focused on why are we going on chain. We're not putting the token on chain for any reason. We're doing it to also benefit off of certain use cases like collateral management, trading, instant settlement. I think these are things that you highlighted, Ben, but would love for you to kind of build on.
Yeah, look, I think for me, so good old money market fund. So like I was an asset manager before this. I think sometimes I feel sorry for the money market fund because it's been around for a while now in terms of tokenizing it, and sometimes it feels like we've gone through like the Gartner hype cycle when they're in the delusion part, wherever it is, the despondent part. Anyway, the use case there is so compelling, right? We have a product that is simple to build, easy to launch, simple to manage, low fees, huge penetration, trusted, right, by every corporate treasurer in the world. And we know now we can add two distinct benefits to that, right? We can enable it now to be a high quality liquid asset. Now, importantly, we're just not there yet, right? There is still that work to do, I think, to convince the market. And it's important to say, like, would you like cash? And you go, yes, I would like cash because it's instantly available anywhere. Okay, I've got a cash equivalent. Now, it's really important to acknowledge that a lot of people go, hang on a second, that will require more qualification, more risk management. I may have a certain percentage. So I think it's important to acknowledge that point of friction. Like, logically, it makes sense. But if I offer you cash, you take cash, right? So I think we've still got those kind of final hard yards to do on kind of cash equivalent. On the intraday, I mean, this just leaps off a page to any corporate treasurer. Do you have any spare cash at any point in time that you would like to get as a return on? And instantly you'd like to redeem it. That sounds fantastic. So 15-minute windows, I could be getting return on my cash. I mean, for any corporate treasurer, like, look, okay, this requires a new operational process to manage, but you've ramped up my return on my cash. So I think we've got these really compelling use cases. So I'd say where we are now is we still want more money market funds being tokenized. This will be, I think, the hockey stick moment in terms of adoption of tokenization, because it just makes sense to any audience you talk to about it. I think on the Web3 side, I think it's a bit more complicated. I think you've got an audience that is Web3 native, like they're keen to acquire these products already. But some of the challenge we find today is they want DeFi yields with a TradFi lower risk counterparty and instant liquidity. And you're like, I'm really sorry, guys. Like, you're going to have to look at that Venn diagram a little bit, and there's going to have to be some give and take. So I think what Nick and I are seeing a lot is in the middle of those conversations, acknowledging for the DeFi guys that, if you want the yield with a trusted counterparty, there are some other aspects you're going to have to move on. So yeah, that would be my two views on kind of the distinct trends we're seeing there.
Yeah. And case in point, I was talking to a well-known sub-advisor today, and he was asking, he's like, hey, I've got two products. What do you think the DeFi market would prefer? One is quarterly liquid 12% yield. The other is monthly liquid at 8.5% yield. And I said, well, there's folks that are willing to kind of be market makers for these and take people out, for a fee. And that fee is like, we're seeing around like 100 to 150 basis points. So the quarterly 12% is better because even if, the net fee to the holder is say like 10% and 10.5%, net of the market maker who's kind of providing daily liquidity for it, that's still, double digit unlevered yield. And I think that that's the thing that the DeFi investors are going for. They're like Ben said, trying to tick off, have I heard of this issuer before? Do I understand what's in the product? And can I get out of it at a moment's notice?
But just thinking about RWA and your big focus on having all the assets on Solana blockchain and making it, as easily tradable as possible and as investors need. There's a very strong competition happening now for RWAs, strong competition for stablecoins and for everything else. Like, what are you as Solana doing this year to make sure that you're winning more and more of this market share?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is as simple as what we said earlier, where if we've got all the assets and we've got all the investors and the market is the same market, the assets are all interchangeable with one another, and these investors can all trade on both sides against one another, we think that's where the stickiness happens. If you look at, like, for example, like Ben was alluding to, like these kind of like more like corporate institutional focused only chains. Some of them are, privacy focused. Some of them are focused on allowing each one of their kind of issuers like maintain their own kind of permission chain like within the network. Whatever they're doing, they're inherently fragmenting the buyer and the seller, and they're fragmenting the assets against one another because each asset lives on its own ledger within these chains, and each ledger has this as like a discrete set of buyers and sellers that have been qualified for that particular asset. Whereas with Solana, it's all assets, all investors, same venue, right? And I really think that this is compounding organically at this point. I think you had in your research report, I love this quote. It was something to the effect of 2025 wasn't just a good year for Solana. It was the year Solana became like core infrastructure. It was something to that effect. And I love that line. And it of course, like, we believe we're doing things that help the ecosystem. That's what we're tasked with at the foundation. But we're very small in terms of both the number of people that we are, and the impact that we have directly, given the size of our network at this point. So I really do believe, having been at the foundation, coming on 3 years this year, is that what you're seeing is pretty organic growth at this point, where you've got more and more people hearing about it, from, the street, from one another. You got more assets coming, because they know that there are investors there, and that really does create a flywheel. So the strategy really is more assets, more investors, keep doing everything else we're doing. Obviously, there's also the IBRL, which is increased bandwidth, reduced latency. We believe that the global investors and global assets want to be on a chain that's very, very fast, very, very cheap, very, very scalable. That's always been true about Solana, thanks to parallelized transactions. And this year we've got a couple really, really big technical improvements that will be going live. One is Firedancer, which increases throughput of the network and has resiliency by being an independent validator plant built by Jump Crypto. The second is Alpenglow, which is an update to the consensus mechanism, which one makes it much cheaper to be a validator in the ecosystem, and two, reduces settlement finality from around 400 milliseconds to 150 milliseconds. So kind of long story short, network is getting more scalable and way faster and cheaper to run.
So I travel all across Europe and I talk to investors about why they should invest into Solana, and I always highlight they're the cheapest, they are the fastest, they have the most users. And now you're talking about Solana as an economy. So how do you value Solana? Like, when you look at the Sol price, how do you feel, if it's up or down? How do you link it to the metrics that you're looking at on a day-to-day basis?
It's always, when we imagine Solana's economy, I was thinking, like, how would you describe it? And I think like part of this is privacy piece or looking at other chains. And the only way I can visually describe it, I think from myself, is kind of that, that night picture you have of North and South Korea. So in the daytime, you say North Korea, like organized, everything's happening, everything looks like it's happening correctly, people are moving about, it looks like there's, this society, this economy is functioning. And then kind of like you turn the lights out and then like the true dynamic is revealed, right? And that's the reality of Solana, right? When you look at Solana, Solana is this hyper economy, hyper connected, build it obsessed, fast, And then I think that's sometimes when we look at other solutions, other protocols, and the reality is there is low transaction volume, there is no builders, there is no activity. So I think if I can give you a visual, I've been trying to imagine in my head like how I imagine Solana, and then that's what I would say is that sometimes you see other things happening on other chains, but I'm like, yeah, but the reality under the surface here is that we are a gig economy, we are South Korea, like we are that hyper economy. That's what's happening here, as a visualization. But I think if I can just build on like what we're looking to measure, I think for Nick and I think one of the most important ones is number of builders, right? So you're looking at number of developers, like how many people are developing, how many people are deploying, right? Because it's the truth, it's the honesty, right? So are people choosing Solana to build on, and are people deploying? And we have nearly 10,000 developers deploying on Solana continuously. One of the most incredible things I find about Solana is like when you hear that Nick and I are trying to reach out to institutions, it isn't Nick and I, we're like the thin end of the wedge. Like behind us are hundreds of firms building solutions continuously for institutions. And I think that's often what we find people realize over time coming into this space is they might start with a privacy change first, and they realize that actually it wasn't necessarily giving them the distribution or the connectivity or the underlying technology wasn't performant as they expected. And they arrive at Solana, I think two things happen. One, they realize that SVM, although it's a shift from EVM, actually is a better solution. And secondly, once they might start to meet the ecosystem, they're generally blown away because there are so many builders there that are building solutions for them.
And I think that it's very insightful in how you're balancing that. And I think that was something that I was very curious on too, is between obviously your retail focus and then your institutional focus. How has that strategy evolved over time? And then within that, right, there's a two-part question. That's kind of the high level, but then underneath that, to your point, there are foundations, there are protocol layer levels that are building on the blockchain. How do you balance working with those and supporting those builders as well as obviously the institutions of retail users on Solana?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you've been to our events before, whether it be Accelerate, which we had in New York last year. We actually have one in Hong Kong next month, or Breakpoint, which we just had in Abu Dhabi, and Meredith joined us for that. But I think that if you look at those events, it's a great IRL example of the microcosm that we develop, where you have both institutions attending and participating, as well as retail attending and participating. I think that's what makes Solana both on chain and IRL, so robust, is that you really do have both sides of the market. You've got the institutional and the retail all coming together to showcase what's great about the Solana ecosystem.
Yeah, 100%. And just beyond that as well, if everybody's saying, I think our wallet provides a great kind of use case example of kind of how the market is matured as well. So, if you look at Phantom, has over 20 million plus wallets. It was built initially for retail. It was built to be best in class to serve meme coin, and does an incredible job. There's always a story you hear for people, how do you find Solana? It's like, if you've been around a couple of years, like I got a Phantom wallet and it was awesome. Like it was just such a better experience, right? But it's that real honesty there, right? Because I think sometimes, as we know, in crypto, we put up with fairly sketchy UI at times. It's kind of like, I think, sometimes your proofs were like, what's your worst UI you've had to interact with? Like, tell me your worst story. But I think if you see the evolution of those platforms now, that now you're finding that those platforms are seen as distribution sources. I think it's like a really putting it into like asset management language, like it came from retail and now it's seen as this distribution pathway. Now there's a gap in between that about neobank, right, regulatory licenses to do that and all those really important things that are going to happen. But in the end, you have one side has client, one side has product. They're going to connect and they're going to scale. So yeah, I think it's really exciting to see that happen like live this year and into next.
Yeah. And the scalability issue is something that I think about a lot because I'm sure like all of us, like we think about digital assets, we think about crypto every day. We have friends that don't. And I think oftentimes the question is, what's the use of being on chain, right? So I think to that point, like obviously we talked about the benefits of being on Solana. To you guys, what's the true unlock between that level of adoption? Because I think to me, that's what scaled really means. It's transcending obviously us four who, we live and breathe this world. And really it's the people that don't really know anything about Solana or other cryptocurrencies.
Well, I think that's one of the cool things is that a lot of people have used Solana and might not even know it. I'll meet people and they'll be like, oh yeah, I downloaded the Jupiter app and I've been using that. They don't even know that that's Solana necessarily. So I think that, increasingly the front ends, the best front ends, and this goes back to the UX conversation, are built on Solana. Why? Because it's the fastest, cheapest, greatest platform for developers as well. And so the best builders and founders are launching applications built on Solana, and many are abstracting the blockchain, right? And I'm okay with that. There's some very OG crypto, like cypherpunk, self-sovereignty, maxis. I do believe in some of that for myself, but that's not necessarily needs to be for everybody, right? I think we need to make it easier and easier and easier to use the blockchain. And that's not just for retail, it's for institutional too. We need to be able to, for instance, the folks like Fireblocks, et cetera, that, make it easier for institutions to build on the blockchain. I think we're, just scratching the surface on, kind of real wide adoption. We in our industry, as you know, we've been saying it's early for a very long time. Still feels very early to me. But that just means we've got a lot more excitement to come.
Yeah, definitely. Just on that, for me adding, I think we're all guilty of this, is that I like to explain to someone why it's on blockchain, why it's on chain. And I think there's that inflection point that happen where, and it will happen really softly, right? It will happen at a moment and we realize that, the joke I often have with most institutions is people want to understand the technology, especially front office, like they're going to ask you lots of questions, but sometimes you reply back going, do you know what your current trading systems run on? Do you know what current databases you run on? Do you know the data sources you call to do that? Do you know the person that runs your AML, KYC, or your validation of clients? And they're generally like, well, no, now some do. I'm being a bit unkind to them. Some do. But I think it's important just to like think about that point, which is that I think there is this early stage where, of course, I think all of us collectively here are required to educate and raise awareness and explain why these systems are. But if I can say, probably on behalf of Nick and I, we probably spend an increasing amount of our times just describing why they're the same. Like materially, like in terms of what you're trying to achieve, it's the same regulatory compliance, it's the same execution, the data can be the same as what you pull. And I think that's really important. I think it's a nice moment to hit, because I think there was a long time where we were trying to make blockchains different. Like, this is a really different thing, and it's really important you understand it's different. But we've hit that inflection point now. We're saying, look, guys, materially, you can achieve exactly the same outcomes. But what can it be? As Nick's spoken to, it can be faster, it can be lower fees, it can have greater distribution, easier for people to build on. I mean, these are all super compelling things that we're enabling to happen. So yeah, the irony, I think, sometimes is we need to talk about blockchain less and products more.
And when you talk about blockchain less and product more, I assume that institutional clients ask you about the track record. And here what I'm thinking is Ethereum blockchain, they have over 10 years track record, and Solana, you have over 5 years track record. So what misconceptions do you deal with on day-to-day basis that 5 years is long enough time to gain the necessary experience, expertise, and build out the necessary stuff? Like, how do you deal with this?
I mean, Solana has processed, and this is like order of magnitude, but Solana has processed more transactions in the last 6 months than Ethereum has in the last 10 years. And so I think when you look at, kind of like the actual volume, both of transactions and transaction volume, with the value attached to it, you'll see that Solana is like absolutely operating at a institutional scale that I think would be impressive to anyone.
Yeah, definitely. And just to add to what Nick said, I think it's also mindful of who you're talking to. I think if you're talking to an engineer, really dig into like, underlying TPS, decentralization. You can dig into those things and really explore. And often I find those, not being an engineer myself, but they're quite amazing conversations to be part of, because you just watch people's eyes open up and going, wow, this actually is a better system, runs better, it's more secure, more reliable. I get it. I think often from a business persona, we say that, 130 billion of value has come onto Solana in the last 4.5 years. It took Apple nearly 30 years to achieve that. So if you want a proof, 130 billion value trusts Solana. Like that is a phenomenal amount of value. So the proof is in the value.
They're very good points. And now, just taking a step up sideways, not sure which is the right direction. We are at the start of 2026. What headline would you like to see about Solana at the end of this year? Like, what would you like newspapers and magazines to talk about?
Oh, that's a great one. So I think I think it's going to be, a few things. I think Solana established itself as leader in the blockchain space. And I think the sub bullets will be, 100 billion stable coins, 30 billion RWA, 10 billion daily transaction volume, 250 million monthly active wallets. I think those are the types of things that will be in the article, and I think those are quite achievable this year, order of magnitude. And so I'm as bullish as I've ever been.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just I think one thing interesting about finance though, and I think we experience is that we don't always shout loudly. So often some of the real work is being done behind the scenes. So I think, slightly more things that are maybe whispered amongst those in the industry that are seeing that's happening is that, Solana is across custody, fund admin, stablecoin off ramp, on-chain data. All these things are now at an institutional grade or a scaling grade and being adopted as a market norm on Solana. For me, that sounds probably not as exciting as a headline, but I think building what Nick said, those are the fundamentals that we're building. And the reason why we're building those fundamentals is it means you can build any product, anytime, for any client, anywhere. And that's what we're going to be doing.
So to expand on that, then you mentioned stablecoins, RWAs, transactions. What are, I'd say, the 2-3 key focus points or partnerships rather that you will need in order to do that for these headlines to kind of come to life?
I think it's just more of everything. Like we said, more investors attract more issuers and high quality assets, and assets of all types attracts more investors, and the flywheel just works. And the best businesses are flywheels, right? They just work. And I think the Solana economy is working, and I think it's working better and better and faster. And, I think we're just going to keep feeding it with more investors and more high quality assets and assets of all types. And, it's going to do really great things.
Yeah, amazing. I think to add to what Nick says, well, and slightly lighthearted is, like our sign of success of the foundation is we're like we're the Homer Simpson meme where you fade into the hedge. And not to sound ironic, but that is our success, right? And it's happening. You heard from Nick earlier, like that's happening more and more and more. Like two magical moments happen increasingly for me. It's such a privilege. Like we arrive at institutions and they sell us Solana, and Nick and I just sort of sat there going, "This is fantastic, right, guys? We were ready with a deck and a pitch, but you've already proved that to yourself through other sources, other trusted sources." So we're seeing that increasingly happen. And the other one is then again when we start to bring in, if it's institutional DeFi or those that have platforms now that are Solana native. And it's an incredible moment because, people are seeing, institutional grade custody, wallets, stables, on-chain, great UI. All these things are now available today. And then generally they're like, well, this is really easy. And I think it's important to say that like, Nick, thanks for being in the room, Ben, thanks for being in the room, but we don't need you anymore. We're going to go and work with the platform providers, and us, that is like the highest success. That's what we're all gunning for. And it's happening increasingly more.
I mean, it goes back to what you were mentioning earlier, where in the end of the day, we're not here to talk about the blockchain. We want to talk about what the actual end use case is and what the benefit is. So I love that. That's a good meme. You really can say that about a lot of the things. Maybe then to take the counter to that, what are some things that you guys have had to take a pause on? Say not yet. We'll focus on stablecoins, RWAs. What are things that you see maybe not being top of priority now, but coming down the line?
That's a great question. Though I think the best use case for blockchain, like where there's very, very clear product market fit, is these financial use cases. So you mentioned gaming earlier. We absolutely see gaming on Solana, and that's happening organically and it's growing, and we're excited about that. Especially when it's like an in-game asset that has tradable value, right? But I think when you look at blockchain as with the database, like to store like medical records or to store other information, and, even if you're using some of like the public, kind of blockchain, public ledger benefits of it, I think that use case hasn't found its clear product market fit yet. Not to say that it won't. I think these are all really great uses of the technology, but I think where we've seen like the absolute crystal clear best product market fit is the financial use cases, trading, payments, DeFi, and RWA, and that's where we're really leaning in.
Yeah, definitely. And just to build a bit on Nick says as well, I think also as well is that so Nick and I have to push back against the logic. So people take the whole of the financial system and then go, let's attack every point simultaneously right now. I think sometimes we're like, look, the logic is unassailable. Like these look like fantastic use cases for the application of technology, but right now, we need more allocation, we need more issuance, and we need more kind of headline market infrastructure. So I think also it's fantastic to see people have that vision, and we 100% buy into that. But I think one of the things I think has been Solana's strength as well has been that focus. And the near-term focus for us, as you can probably see, is bringing those allocators, connecting distribution networks, scaling issuers, and connecting those through market infrastructure. That's working, and we want to scale doing that.
But now taking a step back, imagine you're talking to somebody who has no clue about crypto, who has not even looked at blockchains. And yes, there are still companies and individuals who have no understanding of what is within our world. How would you guide that person through how they should think about before they decide to build anything on blockchain or before they decide to invest into any blockchain? Please feel free to take any angle.
Yeah. So I think the first thing I would say is Solana is a technology platform that you can build financial applications and assets on top of. Notice I didn't say the word blockchain. It's a technology platform that you can build financial applications and assets on top of. And I think when you think about Solana that way, and by the way, on that platform, you can access global investors from all over the world with instant settlement 24/7, right? And I think when we shared that, or kind of what is Solana with people who are less familiar with blockchain, they really kind of see the light bulb go off. And I think Solana is the future of fintech. All future financial technology applications will be built on Solana. And you're already seeing that today. PayPal, Stripe, Square, Western Union, Visa. Virtually every large financial service provider is increasingly choosing Solana for their rails. And I think you're also seeing this out of startups and Y Combinator that are choosing to build on Solana. Erebor, Palmer Luckey's new neobank is built on Solana. SoFi recently announced that they were building on Solana. So I think you're going to see this more and more and more where, Solana is the technology platform for financial applications and assets.
Yeah, amazing. I think to add that as well, and again, to give a slightly different example, I think there's, when you say there's moments of technology adoption, and I think it goes back to maybe some of our earlier points, as Nick is saying, like, does it matter that it's on blockchain? Like, we're obsessive about it. I mean, we geekily love this stuff. We want to talk to about until people kind of are getting blue in the face. I always remember the moment when my background's payments, when my mum used contactless payments for the first time, right? Real like eureka moment. It'd been around for about 5 years, just didn't trust it, but it was because Marks and Spencer's made it available in the shop. And she didn't understand anything about the technology, didn't care, wasn't interested. The amount of times I tried to explain it to her and bore her to tears was irrelevant. But that moment for her was like a eureka, like, oh, that was seamless, that was simple, that was easy, that was convenient. Tick, tick, tick. Thank you. That's why I do product adoption. And I think we had that similar mindset in Solana, which is it should be that obsessive. It should be, it should be seamless, simple. It should be connected. It should be every asset everywhere, instant liquidity whenever you need it. The nub of this is I've tried with too many friends to explain to them why having a 16-word mnemonic is so important and self-custody is so important. They're like, I just don't care, dude. Like, I'm just not interested, right? And I think that's just something we are, as Nick said, like, we are moving away from. And I think it's, look, we had to go through that experience. And I think moving away from those types of onboarding experiences is very important in terms of adoption.
I couldn't agree more. I think UI is so important when it comes to improving it for just any user, right? And I love that you say that, Ben, because payments is how I typically describe the benefit. By your accent, I don't know, you're based in London, I believe, but I was trying to buy a football ticket match when I was over there in London last year. And I'm telling you, I could not for the life of me find a payment platform that worked for my seller. I just could not. And I asked about crypto. We ended up using like 3 different platforms, and then we just decided on just setting a bank wire. And that was a whole deal too, because it wouldn't settle in a couple of days. So I could definitely relate to that
So
piece.
so in this example, I'll shell a Solana application that I think is like purpose built for Solana. It's so great. I use it all the time. It's xp.tickets, and they aggregate all the main ticket suppliers like StubHub and SeatGeek and everything like that. And you can buy it with your credit, with your credit card, or you can pay with stablecoin on Solana. And if you pay with stablecoin on Solana, you get a discount. And I always start my search there because you're getting the same inventory you're getting on StubHub or Ticketmaster or whatever, and then you can buy with your Solana stablecoin.
That's awesome.
No, I
XP
love them.
ticket.
Tickets, yeah,
Tickets.
xp.tickets, yeah.
I'll have to
Have to
try it.
test it out. Yeah. We had another protocol that was trying to revolutionize entertainment. I think that's another very kind of step 2 use case. So that makes sense. So I know we're running on time. To wrap up, I have one final question. It's very fun, very high level. But if you had to describe Solana 3 words, maybe we could talk about future success 5 years from now. What are those 3 words?
Oh, it's so easy. Internet capital markets.
Ben, you can't say that.
Gosh. It's fun. Functional. I'm gonna leave it at that. That's it. That's all it needs to be.
Only
Fun
2.
and functional.
To clarify, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of WisdomTree and Solana Foundation and are subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied upon as forecast, research, nor as investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities, and reliance upon them is at the sole discretion of the listener. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results.